protect legal rights, and that works to some extent in countries that observe legal rights. You have activist groups in other countries particularly that try to get around these things by using methods to keep their, most of the surveillance seems to be done really by cell phones today, and they try to change their SIM cards and do all sorts of things to avoid being detected, which generally won't work if the authorities are putting enough effort into it. They work if, the fact that they can't do it for everybody. Osama bin Laden apparently resorted to having a trusted friend who carried messages to him on a piece of paper. That was the technology he was using, which made him very hard to find. They found him anyway, but so that can work in a sense that a system can't find everybody, but ultimately the system seems to break it. What we have as an alternative movement is what the Sousveillance, which somebody mentioned here, an attempt to make it more transparent, to have the populace surveilling the public, the authorities at the same time as the authorities are surveilling them. And there's a number of groups that are serious about this. Cyber logging groups, they have camera phones mostly, but other technologies. And then they want to publish what the police are doing. You have police watch groups in various places that are collecting information. Now, they have the same problem. They have too much information. They don't know what to do with it. They don't have time to look at it all. They can post it on websites and so on. But it seems that in this particular case, the response is to turn the tables and use the same techniques on the people that are watching you. Everything becomes more transparent, and the idea of privacy seems to be declining in general in the society. People don't expect privacy or get it, but that seems to be what is evolving in that particular field. There's the cop watching group. Now, if you go on the website for them, people say, you know, those cops are pretty good. It's a waste of, they're very patient with all these people. Some of the people are very upset about them. Every once in a while, you'll get an incident that'll go viral or something, but I think having the idea that people are watching has a big advantage. I noticed here a policeman giving a ticket to a motorcycle that was misparked. He had a camera out. He take a picture of where it is, take a picture of the meter. You know, he had to have a digital record in case it's appealed of why he did that. So things are becoming more and more transparent. Protecting privacy seems to be largely failing. And there are some of these hobbyist groups you may be familiar with have wearable and implantable cameras, computers that can aid, and so on. That's very exceptional. By and large, people do this with cell phone cameras, which are pervasive. We all have our cell phones with us, so all sort of stuff gets picked up. This is a guy named Steve Mann, the bearable technology. This stuff is interesting, but I don't see the future of most of us doing that. Now, maybe we will eventually get to where your eyeglasses will just have a camera and everything you do will be recorded forever. So I think with technology, if it progresses, it'll get to where there's more and more surveillance of everything, and we know everything rather than protecting privacy. That seems to be where that's going. There's a group called participatory sensing that tries to teach groups to analyze and collect data, which is what I used to do, teaching research methods in sociology, which I have some skepticism about how much the average person is interested in learning of this or wants to learn it. But groups are learning more and more to collect information, process it themselves. Getting more information out seems to be the solution. Collecting data, and then you get into all the questions of what data can you collect, what can you do with it. Perhaps the participatory sensing group becomes oppressive itself, like a Committee for the Defense of the Revolution in Cuba that is watching all its neighbors and what it does with it. It really can't be the province of just one particular group. There's another website that is available for easy processing of data by people who have not really been trained in it. I think in the future we'll have personal servers at home that aggregate data, personal data vaults. There are various technologies that will be developed where people want to keep their information secret. But largely what I expect will happen is just more and more being made available. Self-driving automobiles. is a field that many people have talked about, and it really seems like a very impressive level of technology once you get it. Now, one thing you can see here, it is a gradual step-by-step development, starting with self-starters, automatic transmissions, power steering, automatic choke, all sorts of features that drivers used to do are gradually taken over. My car has a thing, if there's somebody in a blind spot, it beeps at me. You can get one, you go out of your lane, you get automated cruise control. So these things come along gradually. Google seems to be developing this with a lot of equipment, not a whole lot of theory. The theories that they have seem to evolve out of their experience rather than the other way around. And this is being very effective. It seems to be more reliable than human drivers. So that very likely, if a computer-driven car comes down the road, it's going to be safer than a human-driven car. Now, I think you could have a self-flying airplane. I think probably most airplanes already have automatic pilots. They're not generally used for landing or taking off. I think they probably could. Will develop separately in that regard. They have all kinds of very sophisticated algorithms for detecting, diagnosing faults, and I think people here know a lot about this, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. The simplification involves grouping variables into more general concepts, which they do after they've collected the data, rather than starting with a theory of a self-driving car derived from some philosopher and then implementing it. The final example I've been looking at recently goes back to 1970 and has to do with trying to computerize the Chilean economy in 1972 during the Salvador Allende government that was trying to implement democratic socialism, come up with a system where they would have government control to a certain extent, but still democracy and freedom. There was a guy named Stafford Beer, who was, I don't know if any of you anybody here knew Stafford Beer at any time? He's British. He lived here in England. But he was a cybernetician, which is a word that was popular back in the 60s. People don't talk about cybernetics anymore. We've changed our terms. But and he was a very successful management consultant, made huge amounts of money, drove a Rolls Royce. You know, but he was also very philosophically inclined towards socialist democracy. This guy, Fernando Flores, who's a Chilean, was a student at the time, had read his stuff, invited him to come down and create a computer system for the information, or cybernetic system as they called it, for the Chilean economy at the time under Salvador Allende, who ended up only being in power for 3 years, having been elected. I don't know how much people know about Chilean or socialist history, but there was a period of intense social conflict. Now you see here on the cover of his book, this was his control room, which they actually built. It's not just a vision. You notice there's no keyboard because decision makers don't type for themselves. But they had screens, and he had the idea that you would go around and project all kinds of data about the economy so that the decision makers could make intelligent decisions, which doesn't seem like a terribly wild idea, but that was his idea. Now this was in 1972, before we had the internet, you know, so the technology for this really was not very good to the extent that it existed at all. They had like 25 computers in the whole country of Chile at the time, but they had a lot of telex machines, which they hadn't really used for much. So he got a lot of telex machines. He had all of the industries feeding in information on the telex, and they were trying to connect it and come up with a whole picture of the Chilean economy, which decision makers could use. It turned out to be of some value. In '72, there was a truck driver strike, which was an attempt to subvert the economy, and they were trying to keep that from happening, so they were using this information to keep the industries going. Now, Allende was nationalizing all kinds of industries, not just the copper mines, which was popular, but they were going over into all kinds of other things and getting fierce resistance. Now, the result of this is that, first of all, it was leaked to the public by a magazine called The Observer, which is published here in England. And they came out with an article, Chile Run by Computer. And this is the first computerized economy which was ever existed. That was then picked up by other papers, St. Petersburg Times, and finally picked up by the Chilean media, who had not discovered this at all until they read about it in the British papers. Now this, I think, comes out of a sort of science fiction-y model that people had back then, that computers were going to be this all-powerful thing that's going to run the world, and a very frightening thing, and led to tremendous opposition from the right wing in Cuba and Germany and Chile, and from the Chilean society. And that's partly because I mentioned Cuba because Fidel Castro came down there and was they were modeling it in a sense on coming up with a state-managed economy, but trying to do it democratically. Now, these are the idea that you could incorporate the workers into the decision-making process, and they were trying to come up with a democratic software, as distinct from the software the Soviets had tried to develop that would model the entire economy and do away with the market. He had no illusion to do that. It was just to monitor major indicators that you were going to handle, which seemed like a reasonable thing to do, but was not understood, I think, because people exaggerated these risks, having seen the sort of science fiction-y thing of the all-powerful computer, which seems ridiculous when you look at what they had. They had like a 1620 IBM or something, they had tellings machines, you know, and they were lucky, and they got the charts up, they were never right. You know, they were 3 weeks behind. You know, by our standards, it was so crude, and yet the media had the thing that Chile is being run by the computer. There's a science fiction novel, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I've read the summary of it. That just came out in 2009, that's about this. And it goes into, in this novel, Pinochet actually was loyal to the government, and they never had the coup, and therefore this was implemented, and it led to totalitarianism and a sort of a George Orwell kind of a situation in the science fiction novel. Today I find that there's almost nobody talking about socialist computing in the Soviet sense, except for this guy Heinz Dieterich, who is actually an advisor to the Hugo Chavez government in Venezuela. And he has come up with the idea of 21st century socialism, which is Hugo Chavez's slogan. And Chavez apparently likes the slogan, but they're not doing anything with it. But his book, they're not doing any software, but his idea, you see there, Karl Marx with a laptop. If only Karl Marx had had a laptop, Soviet system would have worked. Capitalism, that's basically his argument. And there's a group of European philosophers who are still into this. I thought I put their names on here, but there's a guy named Goertzel, there's a British philosopher somewhere, there's a couple of friends, and they have analyzed the logic of could you run the economy without a market, with just a computer and just a planned system. And what they have to do then is to get an equivalent of the market, which is to use the labor power that goes into something to give it a labor power certificate and so on, and give it a value. Because how do you exchange things if you don't have a price? You don't have a price based on the market, you have it based on the labor, which is kind of self-defeating, because that means the more time you take to make something, the less efficient you are, the more you'll get for it, which maybe is how the Soviet economy worked, which is how the Soviets, the reformers in the Soviet era, were opposed to computerization because they saw it as strengthening the central authority. So there's a fear of it. I think we have here an example of where the fear of socialism, the fear of the computer, led to a great exaggeration of what was going to happen. I'm concerned that maybe that'll happen if so many papers go out about the AGI and how it's going to, you know, like the Art-elect wars and so on, that it'll lead to pressures against it. So far, I don't think the public takes it seriously enough to do that, but if it gets closer, you may get this sort of irrational objection that we got in the Chilean sense. As it is today, the technology has developed, and I saw a story about the number 10 dashboard, which is actually an iPad app, which the British Prime Minister uses every day to see what's happening in all of the various indicators that he has to deal with and so on. And it has everything that Stafford Beer was trying to do, only it's all coming in instantly on your iPad. And I'm sure the people in Federal Reserve and everywhere else have this kind of information. So the technology has improved. It doesn't seem to threaten anybody anymore. I don't think anybody's worried that he has an iPad app with information on the economy. So it's no longer threatening. This is the woman who develops it. It's perfectly good technology. I don't think the problem of democratic socialism and how to balance government and market has really been resolved by humans either, and it's something people are still struggling with. And certainly having the information available is viewed as a plus, but it's pretty much available to everybody, which wasn't clear in Allende's time because nobody else had computers. I'm sure we could all tap into that same information. Probably they'll put the number 10 dashboard up on Apple or someplace so we can all get it if we want. So it's not viewed as threatening any longer. In general, I think that if we look at these examples, we see that the risks are very different in each case. It's not like a general risk from artificial general intelligence. It's a risk of these types of things. Some of the things seem to be pretty much self-limiting. Nobody feels frightened by the pacemaker is going to take over and somehow do something to your heart. Other things are almost impossible to limit. So there are very specific kinds of risks that are out there. As the technologies develop, I think many of them may become greater, but also we can work on the countermeasures because the problems are here now. I think that if you look at the human brain, it evolved from other species, from more primitive brains, incorporating features that they developed. I think the AGI will evolve by incorporating things from technologies that are here now or that will be developed in the short, relatively short spans of time. But this is really sort of an inductive approach of looking at what's going on and drawing conclusions, which seems to be quite the opposite of the predominant approach in this organization, which is to start with philosophical assumptions and draw conclusions from them, which is another way of analyzing something. But that's all that I have to say.
Questions? People may not be afraid of their pacemakers, but in some sense they should be. There have already been reports of the security that governs uploads of like new releases and new versions of central programming into your modern pacemaker is subvertible. People know how to subvert it, and they could effectively, if they wanted to, they could just upload. If you're a wearer of a pacemaker device, they could just kill you remotely. If you know,
it reminds me, once I went to the optometrist to pick up a pair of eyeglasses for my son, and they're terribly worried, so, you know, to prove that I was really his father because they didn't want to let out his eyeglass prescription. And I sort of wonder, what would anybody do with their eyeglass prescription? You know, I mean, terrorists can't. I don't know what if anybody would want. Why anybody would want to upload something from somebody's pacemaker? In that sense, you know, is it something you need to protect?
Yes.
I don't have a pacemaker as yet. I'm 70. I'm needing one sometime maybe, but I don't think you could protect that information if you wanted to necessarily.
I'm Jan Berlin with Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk. And as many people here would tell you that the risk that we are contemplating is not necessarily from AGIs, but from AGIs that are AGI developers themselves. From AGIs that are capable enough to be AGI developers themselves. And interestingly, you are probably the only person here, or at least one of the few people who has produced a GI that is an AGI developer. So it would be interesting to get your perspective. Like, what is exactly the gap between a mere human level intelligence and level of intelligence that enables you to develop AGIs?
that I have is hearing aids. I'm afraid I don't have a pacemaker. I don't hear that well. So even though it's loud, I can't always pick up the words. I think that how we'll get the AGI is, I think Siri is the example. It's going to be a coordinator that's going to draw and coordinate all the other programs. I don't think that was your question.
No, Ted, what he's asking is about AGIs that can program and develop AGIs themselves. And his main concern is the risk of what happens once an AGI can make new AGIs.
Yeah, that's Hugh de Garis's argument. I can't study that with any kind of empirical method since it doesn't exist. It's like the other gentleman said, you know, so you can, I guess, use philosophical speculation to speculate about it is all you can do. On the other hand, I guess you could say that humans can create new technologies and we can look at what they do, but I don't really have an answer to that. I don't think anybody else does either. So
I think that the question would be, from an empirical basis, is if you look at what humans thought about the danger of a technology before that technology was developed versus what the danger of that technology seems to be after the technology is there. And maybe that the dangers we thought a technology would have before it existed were very different than the dangers that technology had once it did exist. And the same may be true of AGIs that can program AGIs. The fears that we have now about them, because these machines don't exist yet and we don't really know what they'll be like, the dangers we project now about them may be quite different than whatever dangers actually are there once we actually have AGIs that can produce AGIs.
I think if you look at the Chilean case, you could say the dangers were vastly exaggerated and they didn't come true. There was no real danger in that system whatsoever. If you look at the surveillance issue, the dangers are real, and I think the answer is the counter-surveillance to try to surveil the surveillors, which goes back to Orwell and so on. Who's going to police the police and so on. So that's, you're going to have that kind of an answer. And I guess if you have one AGI producing an AGI to do something, you're going to have another one producing one to counteract it, as we have in the financial world. If the software goes haywire, you're going to have another software that's monitoring that cuts it off. So I guess I could say that it's likely that the response to this is going to not to be to keep it from happening, but to create other software that will counteract it and watch for it and control it, and that's something that will develop gradually over time. What I get from people here is the idea that we will develop sufficiently rigorous philosophical proofs and logic and mathematical proofs to keep it from happening, or to make sure that they will be good, or to make sure that they will do the right thing. And that's, you know, that's worth trying. I'm skeptical that that's likely to work. I think it's something that's going to evolve gradually. They're not going to have the capability to make something all-powerful like God or something immediately. I mean, they'll have limited possibilities, and we can work on the ways to counter them. So, you know, but I don't, you know, I tend to think of working at a level where you can do something rather than philosophize is my inclination. But I don't know if you can find an example where the philosophers have come up with a rigorous proof of something and that avoided a problem.
So we wouldn't even be discussing these issues.
So in the field of economics, especially between perhaps the 1930s and the 1950s, there was a debate called the socialist calculation debate, where on one side there were a group of people who said the way we should reorganize our economies to be market socialist economies is we'll have a government bureau that will plan all of the production decisions and organize everything. And there were two counter-arguments that were made against that position. And the counter-arguments won. One of them was it's too hard to do. There are too many commodities, the economy is too complicated, you'll never be able to have a government planning bureau that will be able to understand and optimize all of them. The other argument was nobody will have any incentives if they don't get to keep the benefits or the profits of new innovations or new techniques. They all have incentives to take risks and do hard work to make up the new methods of manufacture or try out new experiments with new ways of doing things. Since then, computers have gotten good enough that we've actually, it looks like the first objection has gone away. Sometime between the 70s and today, it actually got feasible for anyone to build a database with all the commodities in the economy and to do approximate optimization over all your production and reallocate all the goods. You could actually do that now. And perhaps things like eBay are indications that little bits of our economy are even run that way. But there's no answer yet from anyone in the democratic socialist kind of tradition saying what we would do about the incentives problems. How do you persuade people to honestly try to add new entries into the database saying, oh, I could do this nifty thing and maybe it would produce widget X more cheaply than previous methods, given the risk that then you'll be told, okay, great, do it, and you don't get to get the benefits of having figured that out. So I think it's a really interesting hypothetical technology that is it's received very little study, and there are these open questions about it that are unrelated to AI.
Is that a question?
Well, maybe I should come out of the closet as a former Marxist 60s radical, which I was in my youth, and I'm well aware of the fact that the world's better off because people didn't listen to me about a number of things. So I'm not quite so certain that I can come up with an answer either. Now, as far as my current feeling is that we tried that too soon, and that a little more of this sort of thing would be a good thing. And unlike most Americans today, I don't think European social democracy is such a terrible thing. It may be in Greece, but not in Germany or Britain or France. And I think that whole issue of getting some sort of planning and control, and the people really want the president to do that. We vote for a president based on how the economy does, and we set up a system where the government can't do anything about the economy. We view that as perfectly consistent. He's supposed to do it as a moral force. No, I think we could bring this stuff in. I think the economists actually have more knowledge than they are given credit for today, the better ones. And they actually do have some real advice about what you could do with the current recession, say, in the United States. But people prefer to go with their sort of homilies. Oh, government's too big, cut taxes, make people work hard. So those sorts of simplistic beliefs are psychologically powerful.
I'm Robin Hansen. I see you as embodying an institutional memory here of the kinds of problems people have foreseen and then gone through and then remember, and then what actually happened. And with that sort of framing, I wondered if you could talk more about, you're advocating that we more look at the history of previous problems as a guide toward how to deal with the next problem. And I wondered what we have in terms of the history of that sort of choice of analyzing problems in terms of the history of previous related problems versus analyzing problems more in terms of an internal, inside view of trying to analyze what's going to happen. How well have those two approaches worked over the years?
I think that's a very general question. I haven't done a comprehensive study on it. If you want to look at the field of economics, it seems to me where we have gotten anywhere has to do with trying to solve problems and work things out. Why is it that today socialism is dead and capitalism is the way to the future or whatever? It's not because it won the theoretical debate. The Marxists were always just as strong as the pro-capitalists in terms of winning the support of philosophers and sociologists and academicians, and they always had good arguments. What we did is we looked at the experience. We looked at North Korea and South Korea and East Germany and West Germany, and we learned from that. So I would think, and that's what Karl Marx said. He had a critique of the past, but he wasn't going to offer a philosophy for the future. But the Marxist movement did. So I think so. That's one example. If you want to look at other fields,
well, say...
I haven't done a comprehensive study on it. Ben probably has.
Well, I was just going to say, in the field of AI, I mean, the arguments in favor of good old-fashioned AI in the 70s were fairly articulate, and certainly a lot of philosophers and theorists and mathematicians at esteemed institutions were going along with that, and it was really the empirical failure of the rule-based methods and empirical success of more bottom-up machine learning-based methods that caused a shift in the AI field. So I think the experience in AI was somewhat similar to what you described in political economy.
But it is destined to be great for some time. I think we should draw this to a close at this point. We'll meet again at 5:30 after the coffee break. Okay.